Was a time of the preacher when a story begun. The choice of a woman and the love of a man, and how he loved her so dearly. He went out of his mind. Well, she left him for someone she left behind. And he cried.
1-0 live.
We are live
Hey,
and well, everybody.
Well, you know what? I was here by myself because Braden was exposed to coronavirus, and then Garrett was by himself because the music didn't work that day, and then I was by myself again because I was in a large crowd and was playing it safe. And here we are finally after all these weeks back together again. So
Reunited.
good to see you.
It feels so good.
It does feel so good together again.
Oh,
So you
man.
had a little escape with your family,
Yeah.
to a retreat setting somewhere in South Georgia,
I can't disclose.
an
that
undisclosed
information,
location.
yeah.
Okay, I won't say any more about where you were.
We can't reveal that information.
I understand. I was at a undisclosed location in Georgia as well, but glad to be back. And it's hot. It's really hot,
Humid.
and I looked really nasty because Garrett was helping me right before we came on today because I backed into a tree in my truck with a backup camera. I didn't ruin my tailgate, but I did something weird. It's really weird, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Okay, so we're trying to figure out why the tailgate is all of a sudden also jacked up when it looks normal, but it's not normal. So anyway, gonna fix that. Anybody has any suggestions, just send them on over in the comments. Shout out to Donna and Nate Deering. Haven't seen that name in a while. Donna and Nate, give us a wave out there if you're out there. Gary Hedges is watching. Leslie Lee. Hey, Leslie, thanks for your text message today. It made my day. Carla. Hey, Carla. Angela, Bridget, and
Charlene.
Dave, Charlene, Linda Bridges, Faye Messer Reed. Faye, where are you, hon? You in Asheville? You in Georgia? You here? Just let us know in the comments. David Finn. Hey, Dina. Good news I've seen this week. Erin McHugh is watching. And
Of
there's
course she is.
And there's an option on here that says bring her on camera.
Oh, we could. Let's do it.
Oh, we better not. No,
She's probably gone already.
Courtney
Well, we have a
Bradley.
delay, so.
Hey, Big Eddie and Nina Horn all watching tonight. Good to see all of y'all too. So I had a great series of follow-ups after Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, Latilda, good to see you too. On Sunday, being 4th of July weekend, I always take a little bit of a different angle with 4th of July. Anybody that has been around me for the last 10 minutes knows that I'm not real big on flag waving in the church house. For multiple reasons. I think the message of Christ should stay central no matter what. And it's just something that happens here in the States that's radically different than what you would see anywhere else in any country. You go to Europe, you go to Central America, you go down under, you just don't see that same kind of nationalism joined with Christian faith. It's just
Right.
it's an anomaly here in the United States. And I've written a whole book about it. So I'm not even going to get into that. The Jesus Tribe is what so much of that is about.
Yeah, I forgot to download a picture of that and put a link to.
Oh yeah,
Amazon.
You can get it on Amazon or Smith and Hillis Publishers, either one. You can find all those links through the website and all those things. Hey, there's Gary Fleming. Good to see you, Gary and Rhonda. Doug Balfour. Good to see you as well. Anna says hello. Glad you're all chiming in here. So this past Sunday, I talked about someone who has been a real hero of mine from a distance. Garrett, when Simple Faith started way back in 2007, in July, late July, 1st of August, 2007. So what's that, 13 years this month?
Yeah.
It didn't take but a couple weeks for me to do this, hey Kendra, to do this series on what I called, I still remember it, Unsanctioned Saints. And I just did a little study on some people that have been very important to me in my life, theologically. And three in particular that I remember. I did a few more, but three in particular that I remember. One was Brennan Manning, who remains still one of the most influential writers, especially for someone like me that was coming out of fundamentalism, and his emphasis on God's grace and God's mercy. He's the one who introduced me to the whole concept of the 12 steps as spiritual renewal. You remember the sermon? Nana says, thank you. Wow, what a great memory. And so Brendan Manning was number one. Number two was a man named Clarence Jordan that I've quoted many times, a Georgian, early, late 40s, early 50s civil rights leader. He was a white man. Got his Ph.D. in Greek literature and theology from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and said, I'm going back to Georgia to do something for the poor. And he did. And it was on his farm, Koinonia Farms, that Millard Fuller and Linda Fuller established the Fund for Humanity, which became Habitat for Humanity. And then Roger Williams was one of the others that I talked about. And Roger is far and away, Brendan is the best, by the way. Hey, Upe, good to see you too. Far and away, Roger Williams is the most distant of those influences. Those are all all these guys are dead now. And somebody told me that if your theological heroes, if some of them aren't dead, you're not reading the right stuff. In other words, get out of the the contemporary view of things and read stuff that came well before you. Well, Roger Williams is known in this country as the founder of Rhode Island, but there's a lot about him that is not known, and I talked about it on Sunday. And the name of the talk Sunday was A Garden in the Wilderness, which is a direct quote that Roger Williams made. And you and I have talked about Roger Williams this week in advance of tonight. And your own understanding of Roger, you just didn't hear much about him, did you?
No, I hardly at all. I mean, I recognize the name, but as far as his influence and what's attributed to him as far as his work and especially regard to the faith, just an anomaly in a sense.
Yeah. He let me just tell some of his story, and I think
please.
you'll see some of the importance, and I can revisit some of his quotes that I mentioned Sunday. So Roger Williams was born, early 1600s in England, and he was very bright, and being very, very bright and very curious, he became a clerk early on, and in that time period, that was a boon. You could get an education. So he was quick with his mind, quick-witted, quick with his hands, could take shorthand. So he received an education. It was obvious that he had a lot of gifts. And in those days, you wouldn't know it by looking at us today, but in those days, the smartest people were steered toward theology, law and theology, and sometimes they combined that. And so he begins a career as he's headed into the Church of England. When he's hey, Ken Vines, good to see you too. When he's a teenager, he witnesses the Anglican Church, the Church of England, burning a heretic at the stake. That was still going on.
What kind of heresy did they commit?
They were a Puritan.
They were a Puritan.
Yeah, they were breaking away from the Church of England. And which is really interesting. That's really a concept here that's important. The Church of England, largely through King Henry VIII, but other reasons too, broke away from the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And it really came down to the King of England saying, you can't tell me who I can't marry, who I can marry, and who I can divorce. And it became an ecclesiastical authority thing. And the Church of England, with the King, exerted their authority and broke away from the Catholic Church. Hey, Linda. And so they were condemned as heretics. And something really interesting happens when people get condemned as heretics. They start burning other heretics. So the Church of England became totalitarian in many ways. And, you know, if you remember the Pilgrims who came to this country, you know, celebrated the first Thanksgiving, they were a persecuted group from the Church of England.
Mm-hmm.
And they came here to escape. And their descendants, Roger Williams, after seeing what the Church of England does, even though he becomes educated by the Church of England, and even though he becomes ordained in the Church of England, he leaves the Church of England to become a Puritan.
And in the grand scheme of
Hey, Terry.
in the grand scheme of what's going on, this is shortly after the Reformation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so this is
just a few
all still
generations.
fresh.
Yeah.
You know, the Calvin, Luther, Zwingli. I
Yeah.
can't think of his
Yeah,
name.
so Luther's at 1517,
Mm-hmm.
and then Roger is a very young man, teenager, child, at 16, 17. So it's 100 years.
Right. Refresh my memory. The Puritans come from are they closely related to the Anabaptists?
Some of them are. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
But they're the ones that we always see, you know, in the dark clothes and
Yeah.
the white shirts. Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an
Mhm.
Angry God. You know, New England classical fire and brimstone, and really severe people.
Yeah.
Really,
Yes.
really. The Scarlet Letter.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us read in school. That's set in Puritan New England at the same time. But Roger sees just the violence
Mm-hmm.
of the Anglican Church, and he does what many of us would do. He courageously leaves it and goes to the Puritans. Well, John Winthrop came to the New World with a charter from the king in 1630 rather. And John Winthrop had a group of Puritans on this boat. And before they step off the boat into the New World, this isn't America, the nation yet. It's America, the beginnings of America, the English colony.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a charter from the king to go start a state, a colony, and they're going to call it Massachusetts. And before they come off the boat, John Winthrop gives this sermon. I mentioned it Sunday. It's called his City on a Hill sermon, where he says, "The eyes of the world are upon us, and God will make us a great shining city on a hill." And he takes Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount and appropriates them to the Puritans and the Massachusetts colony. And that language has been used by American politicians ever since, talking about America as the great shining light on the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus never had a nation in mind when he says those things. He's speaking about the kingdom of God. And, you know, agree or disagree, the most masterful use in American rhetoric was by Ronald Reagan. He used it masterfully, for good or bad, whether you agree with it or not. His politics aside, his party aside, even as his departing speech in 1984 when he left office, he talked about the shining city on the hill. And that's right from hey, Jennifer and Derek from Alabama. Hey, Amy Cooper, Pulowski, David Beavers. Good to see all of y'all. And so it's just been in the American fabric since the Puritans got here. So here they come and they establish this colony in what many folks don't know about, of all places, Boston, Massachusetts. Boston, Massachusetts was the center of Puritan culture. It was a religious colony. the Puritans came here to escape religious persecution. And when they arrived here, they began their own program of persecuting others who were not like them. Hey, Carolyn Mullins, good to see you too. Hey, Jim, I hope you're holding up well. Give me a holler if you are there. Roger Williams follows him. He's very young. He's idealistic. He's 27 years old when he comes to America. He's newly married, has a wife named Mary. He comes to Boston. He's got all this idealism, as most 20-somethings have. This new opportunity to come to this new world, and in his mind, to exercise religious freedom.
Right.
And he agreed with the basics of the Puritan view of the world. And so he comes to Boston. John Winthrop is his friend. Roger Williams is an incredibly talented man. They're eager to have him. And he arrives, and they send him a few miles south of the city, across the swamp, to a little village called Salem. The same Salem that 70 years later would have the famous Salem witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
Let's hold that. Let's put a pin in that. And we're going to come back to that one, all right? So Roger goes there, and he starts pastoring the church and preaching in the church. And he comes up with this radical idea that each and every person is responsible before God. Hey, Jennifer. Responsible before God for their faith, and outside interference by the government or an ecclesiastical authority is not required. It's the next extension of the Reformation. Mm-hmm. And one of the most powerful things he said in that pulpit was that to force or coerce someone into a faith that they do not believe is equivalent to the rape of a person's soul, which got him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty brutal.
Yeah. You got him into
even
a
for
lot
this
of trouble.
day and age.
Yeah. He was not a wilting flower. He was much more prophet than pastor. He had an incredible fire in his bosom and in his belly and this was his thing, this freedom of soul, this liberty of soul. And it was there in Salem that he used a phrase that entered the American lexicon for the first time. There should be a wall of separation between the church and the state. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, would pick that same language up in his letters 140 years later. 140 years. And those ideas may not have come to bear if what happened next had not happened. Well, let me back up. And I mentioned this Sunday, and we had a little problem with the video, and you may not have heard it, but it's really funny. The church and the state in Massachusetts were so well aligned that when they passed the plate on Sunday, they took the collection to City Hall.
What?
The pastor of the church in Boston was paid out of the governor's office.
Huh.
And one of the leading books of Roger Williams' time said that the governor's job is to reach forth with coercive power and use his hand to punish the heretics and the non-believers and the rebels. So there is no separation of church and state in the early American colony in New England. None whatsoever. And Roger Williams was not going to have any of that.
Right. I mean, it just boggles my mind that the reason they left, the very reason they left, was because of exactly what they're doing, what you're talking about. It's wild to think.
But it always seems to
doesn't
happen
end
that way. It always seems to happen that way. Luther, when he broke away from the Catholic Church, within 2 decades, he's involved in the Peasants' War in Germany and just mowing down his brothers and sisters of German nationality in the Peasants' War because they wouldn't convert from Catholicism to his new Lutheranism.
I know. Isn't that wild?
And John Calvin had one of his own family members
Was it burned?
burned at the stake for adultery.
And then we had, I remember Zwingli, he had Anabaptists, those that just didn't believe in infant baptism. He had them drowned.
He had them drowned, and said, you know, the thinking was, well, if you have to be immersed to be saved, we'll give you the full measure.
Mm-hmm.
And they put them under the water.
And it was
And
all
drown 'em.
because they didn't believe in the same
Because
theology.
you don't believe the same theology I believe. Roger Williams in 1640 saw the danger of such a thing.
Right.
And he had a wisdom hey, Matt Miller. He had wisdom. Matt Miller, since you're watching right now, I hope that you're not playing The Devil Went Down to Georgia like every single day because Charlie Daniels died. So give me a laugh or something. Please tell me you're not, because I know that you don't want to play that song ever again in your life, but I know you're playing it a lot these days. Anyway, Roger Williams understood that new colony structure would not survive with that kind of being at each other's throats over religion, killing one another over religion. One of the reasons, and there'll be people that will disagree on this and think, you know, I know the rhetoric. Listen, I know the rhetoric, and we'll say things like, America needs to get back to God, and I understand that, but who's God?
Right.
And the reason that the United States and much of the Western Hemisphere has avoided the bloody religious wars of Europe is because of this principle that Roger Williams would not let go of. So Roger stands and speaks against his friends. I mean, it's not like I'm just speaking about to the man, or I'm just condemning authority. These are his friends that helped sponsor him and get him to the new colony. And then he turns out to be someone who won't, hey Serena, who won't agree with him. And so they condemn him as a heretic, 1640 or so. They banish him from Massachusetts. You know, blackball, excommunicate, all those things. And so Roger just went home and thought, well, you know, okay, me and Mary and this new baby, and we'll have meetings here in the house, and I won't cause any trouble with the townsfolk. And anybody who wants to show up can just show up. And then word got to him late one evening that they were coming to get him. Now here's the thing. This is crazy. Winthrop is sending a police party to come get you and put you on a boat and send you back to England, back to the Anglicans that Winthrop himself was escaping, and the Anglicans were going to execute him for heresy. Winthrop couldn't do it himself. This was his friend.
Right.
But he could have it done.
What kind of soul do you have to stoop that low?
It's crazy. I mean, it's just it's crazy to us.
Right.
But it wasn't crazy. It's one reason why American Christian religion can be kind of all messed up. This is how it started in this country. This image that folks just came to the New World,
had turkey
and
pumpkin pie.
And pumpkin pie, and it was all about just because they wanted to worship Jesus. There are elements of truth in that. They wanted to worship the way they wanted to worship, but they didn't want anybody else worshiping the way they wanted to worship.
I mean, it sounds about right.
Yeah. It sounds about right. So word gets to Roger that he's going to be arrested. He's literally going to get deported and executed, and he leaves Mary and the baby and runs out into the wilderness. And this is in the fall, so he spends that entire winter out in the cold, almost starves to death. He's taken in by the local native tribes, the Nangasarets, and they help him survive. And if you ask, why is Rhode Island so small? Why is it the smallest state in the Union? Because Roger scraped together every penny he could find, and that's all the land he could buy. And he bought it. This is one of those things, too, that's such a sensitive subject. Even today, there was a Supreme Court decision about Indian lands today in the national news. Roger Williams stole nothing from the native tribes. He bought the land from them. Imagine. They had a treaty. He bought it. And if you look at Rhode Island today, those tiny borders, it was never extended. This is enough. And he learned to speak their language. Roger Williams could speak English, 2 different native dialects, Greek, Hebrew, Dutch, and maybe one more language, I think German. Incredibly bright man. And there at Rhode Island, he somehow succeeded to get a charter with old friends back in England. And he took in everybody. The first Quakers to come to this country went to Rhode Island. The first Anabaptists to come to this country went to Rhode Island. The first Jewish synagogue in this country, Newport, Rhode Island. Some of the first Muslims to come to this country, Rhode Island. Roger Williams took them all in out of conscience and would debate them fiercely in public over their theological beliefs and then have a meal with them afterwards, where you basically say, I don't agree with anything you say, but I respect your right to believe it. And so long as your rights do not impose upon mine and mine do not impose upon you, we will live here in harmony together. That became the model 140 years later. That one example became the model. If it hadn't, America would have began as a collection of small warring religious states. Puritans in New England, Quakers in Pennsylvania, Anabaptists and Radicals in the Mid-Atlantic, Methodists in Georgia. That's what it would have been.
Right.
But because of the principles of respect and honor, and there's fantastic scholarly material that's out there now about, and it's so needed, and may talk about this one day in the future, I don't know, about using Roger Williams as an example to recover our civility, to recover our ability to talk to people when we have such, in this country today, such disparate views, such gulf between different groups, whether it be race or culture or religion or ethnicity or any of what it means to be an American, all these different things. Roger Williams still stands as an example. I do like what he told Winthrop. Winthrop made contact with him after he tried to kill him, and after he was in the beginnings of starting Rhode Island. Winthrop sent a message to him and begged him to come back home. And his response is classic. I feel, he told John Winthrop, I can't, for I feel safer among these Christian savages than I do among you savage Christians. What a statement.
Man, this guy, I like this guy. I like this guy a lot.
Yeah, this guy's great. I mean, he such courage. So he started out as an Anglican. He leaves the Anglican church, becomes a Puritan. He starts Rhode Island, and in Rhode Island, believe it or not, this is where I first came across him in my Baptist history class, founded the first Baptist church in North America.
Yeah, I read about
the
that.
first Baptist church, Providence, Rhode Island. And even there, he didn't remain. At the end of his life, he left the church that he started, and he called himself simply a seeker of Christ with no religious affiliations. That his journey of the soul, his journey to find liberty, his journey to find freedom of conscience took him outside all bounds, but it never took him away from Christ. That it becomes pretty obvious then when you hear that story why he just always rang a bell. Always rang a bell for me.
Right. So, much like probably many of you sitting at home are learning a lot of this firsthand right now. So, it was funny. I was texting with Ronnie earlier, and I was like, "So, what what do I need to study upon tonight?" And he said, "Don't. Just come in with, read about him and that kind of thing, and come with questions."
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of you guys probably have a similar question coming to mind. But how much of his work influenced the way you thought about ministry, and specifically starting a Simple Faith? How much of his influence impacted you in such a way when you started this thing that we have now? How much of that is rooted in his philosophy, his thinking?
That's a great question. And of the three people that I mentioned earlier, I would say that they're all three. If you just scratch the surface, you're going to find Brennan Manning, Roger Williams, and Clarence Jordan beneath the surface in me.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, as Brendan Manning did, that there is nothing more powerful than the grace of God, that there is nothing that God's love cannot overcome, and that we cannot be separated from the love of God. That's what I learned from Brendan Manning. What I learned from Clarence Jordan was do what is right and never underestimate the good that can be done when just a few people get together to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Williams, kind of both of those things come together, because I think he is eternally correct that power and faith can't often walk the same path together, because power will pollute honest faith.
Mm-hmm.
Honest faith rarely, it seems, prevails over power, because power and greed and being in charge are so intoxicating that you can very quickly lose your way. And I think I have to say that Williams best articulates the problem with Western Christianity since 350 A.D.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before in our
Mm-hmm.
Q&As. The moment that the Roman Empire brought in Christianity as its official religion, it didn't do anything for Christianity but weaken its witness.
Mm-hmm.
But it held the Roman Empire together, and religion became a tool of oppression. Not wholesale, not everywhere. There's always been genuine faith that is outside that realm. But if you look at the history of Europe, and you look at the history of the Crusades, and you look at the history of the colonization of the world, it was driven by powerful governments and armies that were often using the cross as a tool to subjugate people. And Williams has taught me that faith is about liberation of your own soul, yes, and your own spirit, but that's what it's meant for all people. It's not meant to enslave or to coerce or to force.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone like me, again, raised in deep South fundamentalism, coming across Roger Williams is like coming across water in the desert. So that's all right there and involved.
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of like a side question to that. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious, with those three guys that influenced you personally, and when you started A Simple Faith, a lot of their teachings, their idea of God, their concept of this is how we ought to do this community thing, played a huge role in moving that forward. But so the side question would be, when you in the small group of people set out to start this church, what were the things you had in mind? Like, because you did mention you came from a fundamentalist background, and I don't know everybody's background that was there at that particular point in time, but one of the things we often talk about is how A Simple Faith is a place for for a lot of people that are on their last thread, that have left the church and are coming back, that are giving this faith thing one last shot. So so when you started Simple Faith and you said this, we don't want to be that, could you define what that is? And
I
we
think
want
so.
to be this?
I think so. There might be a couple of the folks watching tonight, but there's certainly a few folks left at Simple Faith that have been there all along. And on that night that we got together for the first time in watercolor,
You broke bread.
I don't remember if we did or not,
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry.
but
This is
I
just
can't
made me think
remember
of
that. But I remember distinctly saying this, that the last thing Walton County needs is another church. But it's my experience that Walton County needs a place, a safe place, where anybody, no matter who they are or where they come from, can walk in, explore faith, maybe recover their faith, maybe heal from their faith wounds, and learn again to follow Jesus, love their neighbor, and serve and worship God. That was it.
Sounds simple.
Yeah. It's simple, and I would say this to, I don't know how many people are watching, just a handful I know, but I'll tell you this, that the hardest thing about A Simple Faith, I can tell you what the hardest thing has been. Keeping it simple. That is the hardest thing, because there's always an idea. We could do this, we could do that.
Right.
We could become this, we could become that. And I understand where that comes from. I really do. Because you enjoy something, you want it to, be more. And a story that what's his name with Sojourners? Jim Wallace used to tell, because Jim Wallace was raised in a Brethren home, which is even more conservative than the one I was raised in. And when he got his driver's license, he tells the story of he telling his dad he's going to go to the movies, and his parents had never let him go to the movies because the movie house was sinful. And I had that, I was 16 before I went to my first movie. Same thing that Wallace did.
Man.
And I didn't go until I had my own driver's license, and my parents couldn't stop me, And so Jim is doing the same thing, but Jim was more bold than I was. I just scurried off the side and did it. Jim gets dressed and he's getting ready to go to the movies, and his father comes and stands in the doorway. Tears. He was so sincere, his dad was. Tears just running down his face, and he says, "Just know if you do this, you have to walk past me." And Jim said it just broke his heart, but he did it. He said, I stepped past my dad to go to the movies. Years later, that became something they laughed about. But at the time, it was really, really intense. And the way that I've shared that story many, many, many times, and I say that I sometimes see that as my pastoral role at A Simple Faith. Is I can't, if you want to go and be this, I can't stop you, but I'm going to stand in the door and say, I just, you got to step by me to do it. Now, I won't get into the weeds of it all. I've had to make that conversation a couple times to people within Simple Faith that I have loved, and they have loved me with all of their hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them have stayed, and some of them have said, "You're right. You know, I get it." And others have left, or they've been angry with me. I've had so many people that want me. You know, you need to be more doctrinal. You need to be more this, or you should do more that, or your style should be more like this, or the church should do this. I can only do what I do.
Right.
And when you maybe you hear a talk like this one tonight, you start to understand even more. Even if you've known me 10 years, you start to understand even more where this comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's something Richard Rohr says. We have to keep people free for God, and we have to keep God free for people. That surrenders all your control. That surrenders all this ability about saying, well, you need to tell this group that, or we need to adopt this code, or we need to adopt this doctrine, or we need to get membership in order so that we can police people better. That knocks all the props out from underneath of that.
Right.
Now, you still have to deal with stuff that's overtly wrong. You still have to protect people. I mean, we do background checks on the people that have worked with our children. You know, we're not just saying, "Oh, we don't care." You know, everybody come in. We're never gonna. That's not what we mean when we say that.
Mm.
If you're a sincere person looking, seeking Christ, seeking truth, seeking faith, you're always going to be welcome. It doesn't mean everybody's going to agree.
Yep.
That's the thing. It does not mean. Roger Williams, quoting him again. I love this. Let me find it here.
While you're searching for that, Carolyn Mullins asked which Brennan Manning book she should read first.
Ragamuffin Gospel, very number one.
Yeah, Bridget shared that one.
Okay,
yeah.
good, absolutely. The Ragamuffin Gospel, Abba's Heart. But if you start at the Ragamuffin Gospel, you got it.
Mm.
That's his opus. Here's something else that he said. William said, "God does not need the sword of steel to assist the sword of the Spirit in the affairs of conscience.
Mm.
For a religion that must be upheld with violence is a religion that cannot possibly be true."
Mm.
That's just he's not just saying that in Boston and Salem 400 years ago.
Man.
This is 100 years after the Protestant wars of Europe. This is him as a child, teenager, seeing people burned at the stake. This is him, an educated man, knowing the Christian history of the Crusades and the Islamic violence. This is a man who has seen it and knows where it goes.
It's interesting to me, I mentioned earlier that his name rang a bell, but he was an anomaly in my understanding of what he did. But, listening to some of the quotes you've shared and learning a little bit more about, his context of where he came from, it's striking to me that his name isn't shared up there with the names like Luther.
Oh, I know.
And I know. Like in Calvin, because given that time frame in history, especially church history, we've talked about the persecution and the executions of people based on theological differences. I mean, this guy is right up there with the nailing the theses on the door.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't say those things at this point in time.
And one of the reasons that he's not as well remembered, too, is because he lived on the frontier. I mean, New England in the 1600s is the edge of the world. So he did not have the academics of Europe where his writings were preserved. We have about 1.5 pieces of actually what he wrote. We don't have his whole library.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason. And he intentionally lived small. Now, his influence is profound, but he wasn't a Jefferson. He wasn't a Luther. He didn't write near as much as Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
So he lived small, but his influence is remarkable. And I want to say this. I want to say this too. That's this can be touchy these days, but it's really important that we hear this. And this really comes out of this pandemic time, comes out of all this upheaval that we see. And I feel like I'm preaching now, but to those that are listening, listen to this, if you would please. We live at a very dangerous time in our history as a nation. And I don't mean that like it's all bad. I mean it in the Chinese use of the word crisis. The word crisis in Chinese means crossroads. Mm-hmm. We get to choose what happens next or what we're going to do. We don't have any control, but we get to choose the path that we take. And whenever a society is at major crossroads, it's a very dangerous time. Mm-hmm. Especially if there is something new being born. What is new being born is not always understood. It's not always appreciated. And as we say in Georgia, a dying mule kicks the hardest. That the status quo will be its strongest as it's about to be eclipsed by whatever is next. Mm-hmm. And we have, and I say this not just about politics, I say this about organized religion. Organized religion in this country is a mess.
You're absolutely right.
It's a mess. And it's bleeding out people in membership, particularly young people. Mm-hmm. And I was preaching my guts out 20 years ago in the Baptist church, telling those congregations in North Georgia, a day's coming, you're going to lose every bit of the generation to come. And they didn't believe me. But I was young then, and I was reading the tea leaves, and I could see what was coming. That the church is not always, but the churches can be a generation behind being ready for whatever is about to take place. And we were, and we are, and we're heaving out these numbers. So that aside, the baby boomer generation is handing off the world to the millennials.
Amen.
You're a millennial, okay?
I am a millennial.
You're a millennial.
In the good sense.
Now, folks, stay with me. Stay with me. Don't leave me, okay? Don't leave me out there. Stay with me. Just listen to me. Usually, the grandparents, the elders, hand it to their children, okay? And then the children hand it to their children. But when you make the leap from baby boomer to millennial, it's 2 generations. Mm. Well, where's the other group? That's me, okay, Garrett? I'm Generation X. I'm Generation Buster. There are so few of us. So few of us. We can't even make a blip on the demographic scale. So we are this tiny little group caught between the elders, which was the largest generation in American history,
right,
and the millennials, who are now the largest generation in American history. So you've got this giant swing in our society from elders to the young. Mm-hmm. So if it feels like, oh my God, everything is just lurching, it is. Because we're not getting a gradual step down. We're getting one massive leap generationally. And my generation will never have the privilege of being able to lead. And that's okay, because we're busters and we're Xers, and we're okay with that. Okay? Right. But here's the thing. I say all that is prelude to this. In a few more years, white, middle-class, Protestant American will be an anomaly. Listen to me.
Mm.
I'm saying it again. I was saying this 20 years ago. I'm saying it again now. White, middle-class, American Christian will be a Protestant will be an anomaly. Why? The country's not going to be as white as it was. The country is going to be far more Catholic because of the growing immigrant Hispanic population.
Mm-hmm.
The loss in the Protestant mainline denominations is bleeding out membership. The United Methodist Church has lost 5,000 members a week for the last 20 years.
That's insane.
And they're not the only one.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So church and state comes down to this. Your church and your God won't always be the one in charge. And you better hope that church and state separation stand.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are you,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to make anybody afraid.
Right. No.
But I'm saying that when we talk about God and church, we're talking about our God and church. When we're only 5% of this world's population. The United States is only 5% of this world's population. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
We're tiny. Now, we're massive and strong. We're an empire. But the world is a much, much, much bigger place than we are. And again, go back to Rhode Island. That one little man in the tiniest state in the Union understood every bit of that. And in 1788, when they were finally drafting the Constitution, it had to be ratified by all 13 colonies, or it was a no deal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what state held out for the separation of church and state in the constitutions?
I'm going to take a wild guess. Starts with
Island?
M.
No, Rhode Island.
Oh,
Rhode Island.
I was just kidding.
I know you were. Roger Williams had so planted this idea of liberty in the hearts of the Rhode Islanders that they are largely responsible for the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. So there it is. I'm exhausted.
Yeah, you've carried this one tonight. Yeah, I'll just share this briefly. You touched upon the current state of the church and the baton being handed off to the millennials. Me being one of those.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because of where I'm at now because of my faith journey. Because like you, 20 years ago, mentioning there was this movement happening. And if we're not on the right side of it, we're going to get whiplash really bad.
Yeah.
And, it was a couple years before we had met that I started seeing these things within the church, where they put out all these leadership books and how to run your church and how to operate your church, almost like a business.
Of course.
And I started recognizing, like, these things that we do on a weekly basis, they call them programs, and programs in and of themselves aren't bad, but you're programming your people, you're churning out these lessons, you're teaching these people these lessons, but the idea is you're programming your people to be the way you want them to be. Right. And if the church isn't doing it correctly, you're just getting a lot of people to buy in what you want them to chow down on. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I noticed that a couple years before we met, and I got that feeling deep down in my gut, like, I don't know if I could be a part of this
I know the
any
feeling.
longer. Because it was taking a toll on my ministry, my personal faith journey was taking a hit, because I'm going, I don't think we're being, the Roger Williams approach. I don't think we're being church in the way that it was meant to be a loving and gracious church and merciful and we're just doing things to do things. We're just
Yeah.
putting out programs, and you talk about a simple faith and keeping things simple and a place where people feel comfortable. A lot of churches have lost that, have forgotten what that's like, because you start passing down traditions and these policies and these things that churches follow now.
Sure. And
And people are, like myself, look at that and go,
it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
exactly, it's exhausting. It's not. I mean, that puts it perfectly. It's exhausting.
I just think that faith, and this may be naive, and it may be just my view, and I'll claim that and own that if it is. But I just think that faith is a lot more free range than we've made it.
Grass fed, free range.
Yeah, it should be more free range. And I jokingly say that to Gary and Lynn Hedges a lot. When they say something about the congregation, I say, well, we're just all free range over here. We try not to have fences.
Right.
And that doesn't mean somebody's not going to get in trouble or somebody's going to do something wrong. That's the risk you take. I would much rather go try to find the one that got lost, with whatever energy that might take, than to corral the entire herd.
Mm-hmm. And I think that right there, what you're saying right there, is a lot of what my generation and younger generations are. They're seeing right through that. Mm-hmm. They're seeing right through the fences. They're seeing right through, we have to have things neat and orderly. And you're more concerned about your programs than you are your people.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where, for me, it was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Like, I can't do this anymore.
Right.
And so the timing of, the invitation to come here and pastor here was just so perfect, in healing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I hope so for you. I mean that. I
yeah.
If I could, I can't. I don't have the means. If I could, I would take in every beat to hell pastor in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Men and women, that the church, that they went into ministry out of a love for Christ and to make a difference, and they thought they were leading a change organization.
Mm-hmm.
And what they really have is a struggling corporation with a very contrary set of stockholders.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it exhausts, it bludgeons them, it destroys families, it puts unnecessary pressures on individuals. And if I had the means, I'd take every one of them in.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you mean when you take them in? I mean, I would make sure that they were cared for and provided for, and let them heal as long as they need to.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a whole nother set of people that go into ministry that are really screwed up. And they find in the church a place to control others. They find in the church a place to build little empires.
Yeah.
They find in the church that ready Puritan sense that I can tell people what to do. And that's deadly in its own way as well. I'm not saying I got it together and you got it together and, oh, look at us, we're so enlightened because we've been set free from all those things. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying you have to be constantly vigilant. Thank you. I'm drinking beer over here. I don't know if I should be doing that. Vigilant when it comes to that, lest you fall into the same. Look, there are no new traps. We've got thousands of years of history. We know where these things go if you do certain things.
Absolutely.
That, again, is why Roger Williams is so important.
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't protecting. He was protecting faith, his faith. He was protecting all faith, because power will corrupt it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And it will manipulate it, or that faith group will become the manipulator.
Right.
And that's not the spirit of Christ.
Mm.
All right.
Yeah, we're out on time, and what a good.
That was good. That was
good
that was
session.
exciting, and I do want to say thanks to everybody that sent me comments, text messages, and emails. I haven't got back to all of them, I know, about Roger Williams, and I particularly Leslie Lee. I particularly appreciate you passing on the video from Sunday to the Rhode Island Historical Society, because I talked about the apple tree that ate Roger Williams. That's something I didn't even get into tonight, but. Thank y'all for so much, and the McTurks, who I mentioned on Sunday, got back with me on their own Roger Williams story, and it's just been so much fun, and I appreciate that. Sunday at 10 o'clock, we were scheduled to be in the building. We will not be there. We will not be there. This spike in COVID cases has just made me cautious. I'm not afraid. I don't want anybody to get sick. And so we'll still be broadcasting right here at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. I would ask you tomorrow, being Friday at 11 o'clock, it's a private service for the family only, but the family is having a memorial service for Carol Dixon. And Garrett and I both will be there assisting. And just ask that you remember Rob and his family tomorrow. Mm-hmm. At 11 o'clock. A great loss to our community and, of course, to the family. So many prayers, many thanks. Garrett, welcome back. Great conversation tonight. Mm-hmm. We'll see everybody Sunday morning.
Was a time of the preacher